Hey, YouTube. Hope everybody is doing very, very well. Today we are with...
Fred Grun, the language geek.
Yes.
Just language geek.
Nice. So I came across Fred because of Andy. Many of you guys... Andy's like... I didn't get Andy on the show, actually, because Andy's probably like the behind-the-scenes language person who doesn't actually talk much. I mean, yeah, anyway. He's everywhere. But anyway, I heard of you through Andy, and I thought, wow, his name is so similar to mine. We got to get him onto my channel. So I'm going to set a stopwatch, 5 minutes, and we're going to talk to Fred about some different things related to languages. So 3, 2, 1, clock has started. So Fred, tell us about you. What do you do? Do you work? Do you study? Tell us about you.
So I'm currently studying linguistics at the University of Brussels, a master's degree in linguistics, second year. I don't work at the moment, although I'm going to start working in February as a teaching assistant for the university, helping students learn English. Yeah, what do you want to know? The languages I speak?
Well, let's jump into your linguistics. I mean, how long have you been studying that?
Well, before linguistics, I was doing a degree in modern languages, so more specifically English and Italian. So I was studying both literature and linguistics, and then I chose to focus on linguistics because that's I quickly found out that that's really what I wanted to do, because I'm more interested in the let's say scientific aspect of languages, their structure, and questions like where do languages come from, how do we acquire languages as kids, things like that. I really wanted to know the whys and the hows of languages.
Interesting. What would you say is the most interesting why/how that you've learned so far in your studies?
That's a difficult question. I think probably psycholinguistics in general is one of the most fascinating parts of linguistics for me. It's really the way I'd say that the way children learn languages is one of the things that fascinate me. And also the way we process languages, and also all the experiments, like the ways in which we can understand using even very basic means. We started very early, like already in the 50s, we could tell so much about how languages work just based on timing and like simple experiments of like simple tasks, and trying to understand to speculate on the processes, like what happens in the brain, etc. And then nowadays we have brain imagery, which helps a bit.
Interesting.
But yeah, anyway, psycholinguistics is definitely fascinating.
So I'm not sure if you know much about it or if you've studied it yet, but have you looked into like what's different in terms of what's happening in the child's brain when they're learning their first language in comparison to what's happening in an adult brain when they're learning like a second or third language? Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, actually, that's partly what I'm doing right now, because I'm taking a module in SLA, so second language acquisition. So yeah, of course there are obvious differences. So it's quite clear to everyone now that children don't learn in the same way. So they like typically we talk about acquisition versus learning. So children acquire languages naturally, while adults learn languages. So they use more conscious strategies, their metalinguistic abilities, as we say, so their ability to understand and to talk about the structure of languages, like they use conscious strategies to learn languages a little bit more than kids, of course.
Could somebody in your perspective, or from the knowledge you have so far and the experience you have so far, could somebody as an adult acquire a language in a similar way or same way as a child?
Well, it's a very
With
interesting
lots of input, etc.
and one that I cannot really answer it, because linguists are still trying to. I mean, there's this debate around what we call the critical period hypothesis, CPH, which is, so the critical period hypothesis is the idea that beyond a certain age, you cannot learn a language. You can no longer acquire a language like and speak like a native. Basically, you can no longer reach a really native-like level. So typically it's like 12 years old or something like that. Beyond this age, you cannot learn, you cannot speak like a native anymore.
Now,
And
what? Sorry, I'll let you finish. Let you finish.
Some people believe that, at least. Of course, there's a big debate going on this issue, and the question is, of course, there are certain individuals which are very successful at learning languages, and I'm sure you can think of people who have started learning a language beyond the age of 12 and speak extremely well, and might be confused for like some people, they might fool natives into believing that they're natives. However, some people believe that those people are actually quite special. They're exceptions to a general rule that you cannot really acquire language so well. And some people are, speculating on the idea that they might actually still be able to use the, let's say, the acquisition device that they were using as kids, something like that.
Which is, what would be the acquisition device that you were using as kids? What do you mean by that?
Well, they would be able to decipher, they'd be better at deciphering phonetic differences that adults can no longer decipher, and things like that. Typically, adults, like at some point you develop what's called, I'm not sure about how you say it in English, categorical or categorical perception, something like that. You no longer perceive sounds as a continuum, but you divide them into different phonemes. Because kids, we often say things like kids understand all languages, like they can learn any language or something like that, and it's kind of true in the sense that kids, very young kids, they don't make any, like, they don't hear phonemes. They hear different kinds of sounds along a long continuum. And adults, on the other hand, I mean, even young kids at some point, they develop the ability to differentiate between those sounds, and they put them into categories. And maybe some people are more sensitive to phonetic, the very subtle phonetic differences that most other people cannot hear, and that's why they would be better at acquiring a good accent in a different language, and also they're more. I mean, it's a very broad topic. There's so many things I could talk about. Like there's this concept.
Well, let's narrow it in. Let's narrow it into this. If you had to answer in like 10 words or less, and you had to go on the record, and we're like, hey man, with the knowledge you have now, currently, obviously you're still going to study, you're still going to learn, you're doing research, all this stuff. You're a young guy. At this point in time, do you think that it is a better idea for the average individual to go learn a language using more of an acquiring based strategy, or more in lines of like, hey, let me actually go study, let me actually go learn a language? You had to pick one. You had to go on the record based on what you think, based on the knowledge you have now.
In terms of practice, like what's more efficient, I think I would not advise anyone to use an acquiring kind of strategy. So typically courses that teach you like that are based on learning, like we did when we were kids, or things like that. In my experience, those kinds of methods don't work very well. I think the point is that adults are adults, so we're not the same, and I think we need to kind of break this myth that says that babies are amazing, they have incredible powers, and they're actually more intelligent than we are, and they can do amazing stuff, etc. We as adults are actually much better than kids, much more intelligent than babies, and so I think it makes more sense to me to make the most of your abilities as an adult, and that implies that as an adult you know a lot of things about how language works. You understand, you've learned to categorize words into different grammatical categories, etc. So it makes a lot more sense to me to use what you already know and build up your language knowledge in a foreign language on everything you know as an adult.
Beauty.
Because what happens in certain language classes based on that kind of acquiring process, that they're trying to make everything instinctive. Sometimes they push it so far that they refuse to say a single word in the L1, so in the how do you call it, the native tongue of the learners. So they're gonna, let's say you're learning Italian, for example. They're gonna be like, mi chiamo, I don't know, Federico, e tu, come ti chiami? And let's say the learner doesn't understand. They're going to repeat it and like gestures, etc., etc. And sometimes my impression is that it can be kind of a waste of time, because I think, you know, complete immersion is great. I think it helps in certain contexts, but sometimes using your native tongue as a you know, a base on which you can build your language knowledge is a much better, like it's some kind of shortcut. You know, you can directly, you know, get into it, and you can say things like, okay, here are the pronouns in my native tongue. Here are the pronouns in the language I want to learn. Let's compare, and let's, you know, I think it's good sometimes to consciously try to build a strategy. At least that's how I view it, and I think that works for most people. I think you don't. It's better to start with, you know, what you know, and try to understand how the language you're learning works. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that it works for everyone. I think some people might be better at learning things more instinctively, but at least I think there needs to be some...
That's your perspective, basically. That's kind of like based on what you know so far.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Nice. Cool. We're going to cut it there. We've gone over time. We always over time. That's okay. It's between 5 and 10 minutes every time. So we'll wrap it up there. Fred's links in the description below is YouTube, Facebook. Both are there. And hey, man, thanks so much for being on here.
Right. Bye.
Cool. See you later. Don't hang up on this yet. I'll just end the live stream.